Hi, my name is Alex. For my group project, I am the linguist. As the linguist, I researched the language and slang of the 1950s. In the 50s, hot rodders and beatniks provided inspiration. Many of the words back then had "ville" added to them. Rebel Without a Cause and the beginning of rock and roll have inspired a whole generation of teen rebels. Throw in some beatnik jazz slang of the day and you have what becomes a subculture that speaks its own language. Through several 50s revivals, this language has stayed firmly in use and even evolved. Much of the rockabilly slang has been absorbed by mainstream culture. And while some of the vocabulary overlaps, some terms are fairly specific to the beatniks, think pre-hippies, and the greasers, think hot rodders. You may notice there are a lot of car references. The winds of change ushered in the 1950s as being a decade of conservatism, complacency, and contentment in great American society, and the 1950s slang proved it. This language was a vernacular that became a primal language for teenagers who sought independence and liberation. In the 1950s, the term burn rubber was used to accelerate hard and fast, such as hot rodders. The word cherry was originally an unaltered car, later anything unattractive. Cruising for a bruising meant looking for trouble. A common slang term in the 50s was dad or daddy-o, a hipster's way of addressing another guy. Another term, drag, meant to depress or bring down a person's spirits, or, as a noun, a person or thing which depresses. A beatnik referred to someone who was a member of the underground non-conformist counterculture that went against the homogeneous culture of 1950s America. Have you ever heard of a woman refer to a well-built, muscular man as a beefcake? Well, if so, then you should know that the word beefcake evolved out of the 1950s. Think about the television shows that discussed the 1950s like Gidget and how teenagers were strolling along Muscle Beach having a good time. Out of all this and the brooding idea of McCarthyism and the Red Scare brewing in the undertow made 1950s slang a covert language all its own. And as with many other eras in the past, some of the slang words are still being used today.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. For our group project, I was the costume designer. I researched fashion of the 1950s. Once World War II ended, many different types of fabrics became available. At the end of the 1950s, tighter skirts and dresses became popular for women. Leather motorcycle jackets, studded boots, and bolder patterned shirts and sweaters were popular for men. Women's dresses had excess fabric, lots of pleats, poofy petticoats, and beautiful collars. Women did not have to spend hours at the gym to get a waist slim enough to wear a 1950s dress. Foundation garments were worn to take care of any little bulges. These were uncomfortable. Hemlines got longer than shorter over the decade, but the hourglass silhouette remained as a popular trend. Women were expected to wear a hat outside the house except during formal evening occasions. There were two kinds of dress styles in the 1950s. There was the dress that fitted through the waist and then fell into a wide skirt. The other was a pencil skirt, which was much more form-fitted. Pants and pantsuits were not acceptable for women out in public in the 50s. Women also wore gloves at all times when outside the home. They wore short ones during the day and long ones for evening. Lastly, practical but attractive house dresses were often worn as daily attire. These were practical for household chores and errands outside the home.
Hi, my name is Maggie, and for the Romeo and Juliet project, I researched the ideals of the culture in the 1950s. To many, the 1950s recall an idyllic era. Everyone lived simple and happy. Mostly every family had their own perfect household rules and ways. Television became very popular. Commercials sold everything. Mostly every household had at least one TV. Sex outside of marriage was illegal in many states. Many women went to college to find a husband, and only bad women were interested in sex. If you were a woman that had sex outside of marriage, you would probably end up putting your baby up for adoption or go live with the father's family. Media portrayed women as the perfect housewives. They cooked and cleaned. They also had the house nice and tidy for the husband when he got home from work. They also had supper ready for the husband when they got home. White society was not only confronted with an African-American presence, but also in schools and public services. The white people were very racist. Almost everything was segregated. There was no threat or even thought of divorce. Even if the couple wasn't happy together, they stayed together. There were no infidelities, no drinking problems, and no drugs. No one ever drank too much or did drugs. If they did, no one ever knew about it. They kept it a secret. There was no quitting or dropping out of school. If you dropped out of school, you could almost never get a job. Men who failed to get married were considered immature, selfish, or homosexual. Many thought it was unfair to the women who were single and waited for a guy. Wife beating was also not considered a crime. Raping your wife was not considered a crime either. These happened in many homes. If the wife did or did not do something the husband wanted, he would rape or beat her, and it was considered normal.
Hi, my name is Kelsey. For our group project, I was a historian. As a historian, I researched the history of the 1950s. During the 1950s, the USA was the largest military power. Its economy was booming. The struggle against racism and segregation entered the mainstream of American life during the 50s. In 1955, a Montgomery activist named Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give her seat on a city bus to a white person. Her arrest sparked a 13-month boycott. Acts of nonviolent resistance like the boycott helped shape the civil rights movement for the next decade. After World War II ended, many Americans were eager to have children. About 4 million babies were born each year during the 1950s. This was known as the baby boom. In 1951, the color TV was introduced. Not long after that, segregation was ruled illegal in the U.S. On January 30th, 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was inaugurated for his second term in office. On December 6, 1957, the first attempt by the United States to launch a satellite into space fails when it explodes on the launch pad. A couple years after, Alaska is admitted to the United States as the 49th state, to be followed by Hawaii. Finally, probably one of the most important discoveries in the 1950s, Francis Crick and James Watson discovered the spiral structure of DNA.